Welcome to the Nonprofit Lab, a podcast dedicated to the ongoing discovery of how we can all be a part of bigger social change through the lens of the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Puya Porak. I'm an industrial engineer, human-centered designer, and CEO of MatchNice, a social impact tech startup with a mission to connect the nonprofit ecosystem and maximize social impact. And right now, we're working to launch a new kind of impact-centric fundraising platform that empowers nonprofits and donors to tie online donations directly to social impact. Join us on our startup journey as we look to uncover and shake up the status quo in the world of nonprofits. On today's episode, I get to speak with Ben Reiter about his incredible journey through mixed martial arts and learn how he's always used his platform to advocate for others and become a leader in the nonprofit sector. We chat about his nonprofit, Beat the Streets National, their mission, impact, and successes, the changes they've had to make as a result of the pandemic, and the importance of nonprofit partnerships, fundraising, impact measurement, and so much more. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Ben Reiter. Ben is currently the executive director of a youth development nonprofit, Beat the Streets National. Ben was formerly a professional athlete and coach and applies the lessons he has learned through combat sports to the work he does in the social impact sector. He's passionate about creating opportunities to help youth reach their amazing potential. After obtaining his bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, Ben traveled to South America where he started and led social impact organizations serving youth in marginalized communities of Peru. After 8 years in Peru, Ben moved back to Philadelphia with his wife and 2 kids, where he started his career with Beat the Streets. In 2017, he started as the mentoring director of Beat the Streets Philadelphia, later being promoted to senior director of strategic partnerships, and transitioned to the executive director role of Beat the Streets National last year. Here's my conversation with Ben. Ben, welcome to the Nonprofit Lab. How's it going?
It's going good, Puya. It's great to be here with you. Appreciate you inviting me on.
Thanks. You were one of the first people I thought of to join the show, and I think people will understand why as we unravel your story and my story and how we've intersected over the years. But let's start with just you and the organization that you're representing. Tell us about Beat the Streets and your role with the nonprofit.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 4 months ago, I started as the executive director of Beat the Streets National. Before that, I started as when we met, I was the mentoring director of Beat the Streets Philadelphia. Started there in 2017, and then moved into a different position there with the director of strategic partnerships. And so Beat the Streets, we empower, transform the lives of youth through the sport of wrestling and all the life lessons that are packed into that sport. I always hear people talk about people that have not gotten on the mat. I know you have a wrestling background. I have a wrestling background, but people that have never gotten on the mat in the day of their life will say, I'm wrestling through a certain issue. I'm wrestling through this challenge. And that word gets used all the time. And what we do is we really, that's the mission, right? We tap into those lessons that are embedded in the sport, and we use as a way to help youth through life and help them overcome adversity, navigate challenges, bounce back from failure, set goals, work towards those goals. And then it also comes with this really supportive community of coaches that are in your corner, of mentors, of volunteers, like how you got plugged in with Beat the Streets and helping our student athletes apply for colleges, figure out next steps, homework help, and preparing for tests, and all sorts of, and just kind of that life guidance role too. So it's wrestling's the vehicle, and it's the vehicle because it's this great metaphor for life. It teaches us all these things that help us through all of life's challenges, and And the mission there is really to support and positively alter life's trajectory for our youth in all aspects, everything that they're dealing with. And I just feel really blessed and grateful to be a part of this organization, because I see I see it working. I meet inspirational youth all the time, and the things that they're doing with their lives, and then coming back and giving back to the younger kids and doing that full virtuous circle that occurs is really amazing to see. And yeah, that's a little overview. I guess I'll talk of national is so we're a national network now, and there's 10 different chapters. Collectively, we're reaching 8,400 youth each year. And then, national's kind of new. It was really grassroots movement first, and then national is established to figure out, okay, how do we strengthen what we're all doing? How do we figure out how to collaborate and get better at what we're all doing? And then how do we figure out how to grow this across the country and beyond? So that's my job to kind of help figure that out now. We see what we're doing is working, but there's still thousands upon thousands of youth that need to beat the streets. And we need to. It's our job at national to figure out how do we go meet that need.
I love that, and I love the mission, and I couldn't agree more with everything you said about wrestling translating to just life in general. I mean, a lot of the persistence and grit that I find characteristic of my own self as a person, I think was largely like cultivated on the wrestling mat, and the skills that you learn on the mat, of course, translating to life, but then all of the mentorship and academic support that Beat the Streets provides really, and the community of support around your student athletes is really what makes it a holistic approach. And can you believe it's been 4 years now? This January will be 4 years since like the first time that me and you met and that I had called in. And I was at a yoga studio. I saw someone wearing, Ian, actually the mentor, wearing a shirt that said Beat the Streets. I said, "Hey, what's that about?" And he said, "Oh, it's this nonprofit that focuses on, growth and education and, getting kids into college and all this. And it's all through the sport of wrestling." And I just remember lighting up because I just moved to Philadelphia and I was looking for something new. And do you remember the first time we met?
Yeah, I do. I remember. And thank you. Shout out to Ian for spreading the word and the mission. He is an amazing mentor and coach and really plugged in the Beat the Streets community. And then he recruits awesome people like you. So we were really, really shout out to Ian. And I remember that. And it was really awesome just to have you so involved during those years in Philadelphia and everything that you've being there for our youth at Beat the Streets. Really grateful that you're a part of this.
Well, I'm really grateful that the organization exists and that the mission is alive and moving forward. If it wasn't for Beat the Streets, I don't know that we would be having this conversation. One, not just because we met, but the spark for Match Nice was what happened at the Mentoring Center in Philadelphia, where I saw the power of all of the various partnerships that Beat the Streets had with other nonprofit organizations, with other just businesses and services around you in that community. And that's when the light bulb clicked of like, oh my gosh, like how many more of these mutually beneficial partnerships could there be? There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the US, and that led me on my initial journey of discovery. And it wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in that space volunteering with you and everyone else at that organization. So pretty cool connection there.
Definitely. And I'm so happy that you're building up the momentum with Match Nice and getting, just creating something that's so valuable and helpful to not only Beat the Streets causes around the world, causes all sorts of and I've always had that belief of just, I know we're stronger together. Collaboration is so important to be for our mission to do the best that we possibly can for the youth that we serve. Collaboration is a must. And, but the thing about collaboration and being stronger together, it's totally true, but it also takes time and intentional effort to really make it happen. So match size is a huge need, and really, and it's awesome to hear that kind of, that your experience with the streets kind of, let the creative juices start flowing for this awesome idea.
Thanks. And, as you know, like our solution, we pivoted from where we were going to becoming an impact centric fundraising platform at the pivot of the pandemic and all the shifts that caused. I wanted to hear your story about like the first off, what drew you in? What drew you into the nonprofit sector?
I'd say just that throughout, I've had volunteer opportunities and meaningful experiences throughout life. I was in college. I went to Togo, Africa, helped build an orphanage, and I just kind of looked at helped during Katrina, and those moments in life it kind of it felt like purpose. I mean, I feel like it's part of our purpose on this world to think about what we could do to help our society and world and those around us. I think that's just from a spiritual point of view, from like feeling it throughout life. I just think it's one of those areas that we're supposed to, we're supposed to be thinking about others as human beings. Otherwise life can kind of get a little bit empty. So I just, and not that you have to be working in the nonprofit sector to do that. There's all sorts of ways to do that, but that's the feeling that drove me to seek out opportunities in the social impact sector. And that's what led me to South America, and then ended up staying there I thought I was gonna be there for a year, stayed there for over 7 years. And that's what led me to get plugged in and work with Beat the Streets. And yeah, it continues to be a driving force and true now. And yeah, I think that's the core of it. I think it's part of our purpose on this earth.
I think that's like one of the biggest reasons it was so easy to connect with you, because I think when you share a purpose with someone, like it's just much more natural and easy to connect. And it's taken years of introspective work for me to come to articulating my own inner purposes, connecting with and helping others, and that's just where I find the most fulfillment for myself. And it's the more I learned about you, Ben, like the more amazed and inspired I became. And in my last episode with Dr. Laura Otten, I may or may not have referenced you as an angel who could also crush you. And I said, and the angel is because like throughout your entire career, like outside of college and even within college, you've always managed to use your platform, use your privilege, use your energy to raise awareness to different causes and to support the people around you. And the crush you part comes from the fact that you're an NCAA wrestler and an MMA champion in South America, and rose to the ranks and got that championship belt in Peru. Tell us a little bit about like that journey and how MMA and combat sports and wrestling kind of there was always this marriage between that and also making the time to do good. That's not an image we get often in media. When we look at combat sports and like people that are in MMA, rarely do we also see like the philanthropic, like good-hearted angle. It's sometimes, like other fighters like Conor McGregor have given this stereotype of like all fighters are just talking trash all the time. But I think
Yeah.
Dustin Poirier is also like a good example of someone like through the Good Fight Foundation. I know there's a connection to Beat the Streets there, but tell us about your story and your journey with MMA and philanthropy.
Yeah. Well, I'd say so. I mean, we've going back to the first part of our conversation where my experience with wrestling really shaped me as a person. And I found some of those. One of the things we started talking about too is that sense of community, right? And one thing I found this true with combat sports too, where wherever I found a mat, I found a home. There's instant community. It connects people from all over the world, all different backgrounds. Before training for a fight camp, there's people from India, Middle East, Russia, South America, all pretty much all the continents, and all sorts of different backgrounds and journeys and stories, and that sport brings people together. There's a unified feeling. Everyone's a team and helping each other, and there's connected. Everyone's getting along, and I mean, of course, there's just so that type of feeling is pretty amazing and special. And then what kind of kept me on, I get this a lot of just when I talk to people, they're like, were you really a fighter? And all that, just because they expect fighters to be mean, I guess. I don't know. But there's also just the challenge. And it's one of the most, I mean, I look at MMA as one of the most kind of complete athletic challenges that you can kind of take on. There's so much going on, both physically and cerebral, just figuring out strategy, and there's so many different ways to kind of get the outcome you want, and so much things you have to kind of figure out. So there's that. But what really kept me going all in with MMA for a while was the platform, like you mentioned, where it was one of my first fights, and I was doing social impact work in Peru, and we were help build this community centers, doing educational projects, and running an after school program and things like that. And one of the little girls in the community center that we were working with, and this is in Pueblos Jóvenes, they're like these new settlements out on the outskirts of we were on the outskirts of Arequipa, but those new settlements basically just means you have populations coming down from the mountains, from the Andes, or from really rural areas, and trying to get close to a city to find some work, but there's nothing really there yet. There's no infrastructure. There's no running water, electricity, and schools set up, or all of that. It takes time for all that to get kind of set up. So there's a really vulnerable period of time where you need support to kind of get through it. And anyway, the story I was kind of getting into is one of the little girls there had this a need for these operation Treacher-Collins syndrome. She had all these like facial deformities, and there was some of it was fixable through surgery, but she had a really tough time. She couldn't chew any like solid foods, oxygen. It was tough for breathing, all sorts of tough issues, things that really were making her suffer. And so one of my early fights, I was just like, okay, I wasn't making much money on these fights. When you're first starting, it's pretty early. When you're first starting in MMA, it's not very much, but I figure as a symbol, it might motivate some people to help. So I said, I'm going to donate my fight for Caddy's operations. And then she's like, then a whole bunch of people started supporting too. A clinic called up, because I had an opportunity to kind of get on, national TV, and they're interviewing about what I'm doing and all that stuff. And then a clinic came in and was like, yeah, we'll do it. We'll cover it all. We'll cover the costs. And then that moment made me realize, like, I had a feeling before that moment that like this, that my platform as an athlete could be used for some good, but it wasn't. So, that feeling kind of drove me to like, okay, let's try it. But it worked really well. And then that kind of decided it for me, like, all right, I got to keep doing this for a while and see if I could rally some support for different causes. And that was a big motivator for me.
It's such an inspiring story. I remember just hearing about your journey in South America, and how you always, and that was the first time, but that wasn't the only time. It seemed like every opportunity you had as a fighter, you used to try to use your platform to affect social change. And I think that's that's one of the many reasons that you're a role model for me. Is it goes to show that no matter what you're doing, no matter what your career path or vocation or what it is, that we can all like stand and promote social impact and justice in whatever way we can.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, everybody has the power and ability to do some good in the world, and nobody could do everything, but everybody could do something. And if everybody does something, then things get a little bit better.
So
Yeah.
then, so what's the connection? So how do you go from, fighting full time in Peru and also doing this work for philanthropy on your own? How do you go from there back to the U.S. and working at Beat the Streets? I don't know that I know that story.
Yeah. Well, one, I would say, I was never on my own. There's just been great people all along the way that have helped throughout my journey. And yeah, there's no way I could have done anything on my, I don't know. Like, there's so much that, there's all along I think part of that I'm realizing, now that a part of it's like, leadership style. But I've felt really fortunate just to have great people all along the way help me figure out how to do some good and get towards these goals. So but the journey from fighting in Peru. So I was the first half of my MMA career. I had a South American title. I defended that for 4 years. Then I signed with Bellator, and was working up the ranks to get a title shot there for a world title. And um, and during that time, so I was traveling all over. And then at some point, I think it was around, so I did that all through my 20s. Like, I was all in, training a ton, competing all over, and I'd be and running social impact projects in Peru. Then throughout that time, we've had conversations with my wife of just like, eventually we do want to bring our kids to the States, and those conversations. And then also just the I had some injuries piling up, and just the realization of just that, this is a chapter of life. I'm not gonna go, compete against, I'm not gonna go compete MMA, step into the cage for ever, for 20 years. I was all in for about 8 years. And so then that realization, and then just also, it's a risky way to make a living. You could earn a lot in one fight, but you could also get hurt and be out of work for a couple of years. So there's that too. So it was kind of just family, was a big driving factor, and just kind of realizing, like, okay, the feeling of just there's chapters in life, and maybe this was, that's one chapter. And then when this opportunity came to Beat the Streets, it was a clear sign to me that, okay, it's time for the next chapter. And this next chapter is also going to be amazing, fulfilling, rewarding. And that was the feeling, and, kind of reflecting on that and praying through that. And that was the conclusion I kind of came to, is just, okay, that was an amazing chapter. Now it's time for the next chapter. And so then with that, I heard about that Beat the Streets Philadelphia was hiring, and I was plugged into, I was living abroad, but I was kind of a fan from abroad, because I always really admired the mission, because it really kind of ties together a lot of what I'm passionate about and care about. So when I saw there was an opportunity to join the team, I applied and ended up getting hired, and that started my journey with Beat the Streets. And then there was the journey of getting my family here to the States and all of that, which took so much longer than we hoped for. It was tough, but we're here now, and everything's really, just feeling super grateful and blessed on that.
One
Yeah.
big family, one place,
Yeah.
one great mission that you're working on as well. And yeah, man, I couldn't be happier for you. Um, to come back to the pandemic, I kind of mentioned that, and then wanted to hear a little bit more about your story. And this is certainly a big part of your story. I think at the time you were still at Beat the Streets Philadelphia when the pandemic first started. Can you talk about your experience as a nonprofit leader going through the pandemic, where programming and everything was largely in person, and talk about that experience and the necessary shifts that happened for you and the organization?
Yeah. Well, we took the mindset of, we're going to focus on all the things we can do. There was a lot of, it was really kind of, it did turn everything upside down for a bit. We had to close the doors to our mentoring center. A lot of our partnerships are with schools and community centers. And so then there was the feeling of just like, okay, we can't really do anything until it's through partnerships. We can't go back to in person until our partners are ready, and then figuring out when the right time. So there's always a kind of a struggle of just, there's two things that are, there's COVID, which is doing so much, which is taking lives, hurting society, all these things that are, really, really horrible things happening through COVID. And then there is the other thing to wrestle with, of just like how having our youth at the Beat the Streets Mentoring Center and plugged in with their coaches and their community is also really, really important, right? Because, we have, there's a lot of violence on the streets. There's a lot of things that are just, our kid, like we were getting that from our kids, like, they need that too, right? Like they need to be there doing something that they care about or passionate about in with their coaches and role models that are positive influences, and all of those that's all really important too. So it's really tricky to find, to kind of figure out what's the exact right thing to do at the right time. But what we ended up doing, we went all in on virtual programming. This first week of having to close a mentoring center, we assembled a team of mentors to do weekly checks with everybody that comes through. So we're calling every kid every week and checking on them, checking on their family. We lent out Chromebooks. We did food deliveries. We were out in the, me and my kids, we'd go out, we'd take the Beat the Streets van and deliver meals to families and do that. We were there to kind of help navigate any challenges or direct families and youth to if we couldn't help in the situation, kind of direct to someone who can and help with those. So we took that kind of holistic approach, which we always have had that mindset of just wrestling's the vehicle. We're here to help in life. So with that mindset, that's kind of, that's always given us the approach of just, we're gonna find a way to figure out what the challenge is, and and if we can't directly, then we're gonna connect, and we're gonna find people who can. And we've taken that approach always. And then COVID was an example where we really had to embrace that mindset. And then we got support from the broader wrestling community. We got Olympians that were doing virtual workouts that ended up being part of all the gym class curriculum. And we got that for all of our kids. We got together with all of the, every Beat the Streets chapter. We launched this 1,000,000 minutes challenge. So if kids could we collectively log in 1,000,000 minutes of physical activity and personal growth. And so we got, we all went in on big on that on social media, and we got in calling up kids, encouraged to do that. We had virtual workouts and then we had our weekly mentor meeting. We had youth doing advocacy work. Abubakar and Tatiana actually presented to the mayor of Philadelphia, chief of police, on things that they worked with, where they led a group of Beat the Street student athletes, and mentors helped with that on ideas for reform. And they were on this big kind of this virtual gathering to panel to work through those ideas. So we've had some really inspirational youth through that. And those are just examples of the mindset I was mentioning earlier, that we focus on all the things we can do. COVID brought up some challenges, but we were there. We were just doing everything we possibly can for our youth and positioning ourselves to, when everything kind of opens back up, we got to be ready. And that's what we've done. And then, the schools most of our schools partner this year now. I think the majority, pretty much all of our partners are back online now with their programs, and there's even more interest, and kids have been anxious to get back on the mat. So we're going to be back on that growth trajectory, like we were pre-COVID. And then from a national perspective, it's depends on the school district, as far as how fast we're bouncing back. But we are bouncing back, and we never really, and all of us, all Beat the Streets chapters have really just did everything we possibly can to make sure that we're there for our youth throughout COVID. And then we're going to keep growing. We're going to keep growing because this is something, we get great feedback from our youth and families, and we know we need to keep doing this. So we want to increase these opportunities that are available to youth across the country.
Yeah, I think there's a big lesson in what you were saying. Like the response that you had was very stoic in many ways in terms of looking at what's actually in your control and what's not in your control, and focusing on those controllables, and how Beat the Streets very quickly worked to adapt what was a largely in-person function and programming into an empowerment model where everyone in the organization, whether you were a student athlete or a mentor or board member, I'm sure, was activated in a virtual way. We were just talking about the changes that Beat the Streets made to adjust to all of the massive changes of the pandemic. So we talked a little bit about programming and how you all were responsive to your student athletes within the scope of what's in your control. What can you do? Can you talk a little bit about adapting your fundraising strategy? Because, events are largely the main mechanism for nonprofits to fundraise. So talk about like what that looked like, moving away from that annual event that you're used to, and adapting to a more digital first fundraising model.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did our events. They did cover about pretty close to half of our operating budget with Beat the Streets Philly. So now I'm kind of at this time I'm more talking about my role at Beat the Streets Philly, but it's kind of consistent with what our chapters were feeling across the country. But yeah, we had to cancel events. That was a big hit, but fortunate. We feel really fortunate on just our donors stepped up. We did a better grant year than we've have ever in the past. So we leaned in to the grants. We just, I remember just calling, all of our donors that would have come to those events often supported anyway. So it's really just a big thank you to our committed group of people that are in our corner that believe in Beat the Streets and want to and know that what we're doing is having a great impact, and we need to keep that opportunity there for our youth across the country. So I think it was very, it was there were some scary moments. It was tough to navigate. And it's really just the way, but we came out okay. And it's a testament to the commitment, the heart, the confidence and belief from all of our supporters out there that stepped up either at or more than ever to help us get through this really tough time.
Yeah, and I love that you place the emphasis there on the relationships, right? Like where people, where it wasn't this transactional donation, like actually, you had the relationship to call those donors and to reconnect, and that they were just as willing to donate again, regardless of whether the in-person event was happening or not. And I think one of the biggest premises for Match Nice and what we're trying to do is foster that level of relationship through a digital channel. And part of what we've talked about and what we as a company believe in is that the ability for nonprofits to speak to impact clearly to donors is a major motivator for this new generation of donors that want to understand the impact of their giving. So, tell us about the Gear Up Drive and how you guys have structured that, because I think it's a great example of taking a step towards tying fundraising back to programming and impact. And so tell us what the Gear Up Drive is, the progress you're making, and then we can kind of dance around the importance of speaking to impact within that.
Sure. Yeah. Now this is with my new role leading national. And so I'll start with some of the history there, because this is kind of new for what we're doing at national, right? Because this is the first set of objectives for national was to build an accreditation process and get all the existing organizations onboarded through that accreditation process. And that all happened. That was the heavy lifting for that was started before I stepped into the role by my predecessor. And I'm continuing that and continuing to onboard new chapters. But now there's also a focus on, well, with a national network, we can go and advocate for partners that might do a little bit at the local level, but they could do a lot more at the national level. So we want to build partnerships and funding partners and program partners that direct resources to strengthen all of our existing Beat the Streets chapters. And then we also want to become the catalyst and support network to find those leaders that are out there that want to bring Beat the Streets to their community. How do we give them the roadmap, the playbook, and empower them to be a sustainable, impactful organization? So those are two big kind of growth focuses there. We have our visionary goals that line up with the 2028 Olympics that will be in LA. The idea is that we have Beat the Streets people from across the country to celebrate hitting those goals. And it's about growth. We want to get to 28 new cities by the year 2028. And we want to grow girls wrestling by 280%. So that's where we're headed. We want to take this across the country, and now we're figuring out how to get there. And one of the big things that we should be focusing on is building those partnerships that strengthen what we're doing and bring resources to what we're doing. So the Gear Up campaign was maybe a couple weeks into starting, and I got a call from one of our supporters at Beat Streets Philly and has done Gear to Compete. So he does a lot of the gear for a bunch of the different chapters. And he said, "Hey, I got a bunch of donations from ASICs. I want to get those to Beat the Streets kids." And then that went to, let's set up a call. And then we got ASICs saying, "Okay, well, what does it look like if we could get, we know that youth living in poverty are 6 times more likely to quit sports because of costs. And we know that sports are really impactful, both social, emotional, educational, health, all these positive outcomes that come from participating in sports. And we want to make sure that our Beat the Streets programs are free. We want to make sure that all barriers to entry are addressed. And gear is one of those things. Gear adds up. So we want to make sure that every Beat the Streets kid that needs it has their pair of wrestling shoes and headgear and shorts and shirts and sports bras for the girls and everything you need to participate in the sport. So we talked to ASICs and Gear to Compete were the first 2 conversations. Just what does it look like to do that on a national scale? And that's what launched the campaign. And then we called up Good Sports, which is another nonprofit who has that mission across all sports. They want to get gear to youth across all sports. And we asked them, "Hey, what do you have that could work for this campaign?" And then they made a huge donation of product and shorts and shirts. And so then basically between those 3 partners, because of those 3 partners, now we were able to launch a campaign and be able to say that for every $50 that someone donates to this, a Beat the Streets kid is going to get $200 worth of gear because of the donated and discounted gear that we got through those partners. So then we launched the Gear Up campaign. We have a $100,000 goal that will provide $400,000 worth of gear out to Beat the Streets youth across the country. We want to reach 3,000 youth with that, and we're getting close. We're at about 80 or so in the campaign, about another 7 on the way in pledges, and we got to just keep pushing to the finish line to the end of the year. And it's been working really well. This is kind of our first campaign at national where we built these partnerships, raise funding to go and bring resources back to all the chapters, and meet something that's really a core need for our youth across the country. And we want to keep doing things like that. And this is like the first example of it, and we're going to build upon it each year. We're going to do more and more things like that at the national level.
I love the way you explain that by starting with the mission and the vision that you all had, and then kind of building on it with the programming and then what it would take to execute, and then how everything kind of fell into that. And I think that's the exact storyline that people want to see and hear, right? It's like, how is me buying a pair of wrestling shoes or donating, a set of gear, like beyond just like the activity counting, like what does it mean? Dr. Laura Otten and I were talking about the importance of impact measurement and the state of impact measurement, and how it's been a roller coaster of, like, at first it wasn't required, and then it was required back then, and it was funded by donors, and then it wasn't funded by donors, and now the burden is on nonprofits to provide this information on with your own resources and constraints. And like, just wanted to get your thoughts and views on the way that Beat the Streets and you all are looking at measuring the impact of your programming, and like this difference between measuring activities of, like, we saw this many people or this many people came through the door, to then actually like making that next step to measuring the outcomes that ultimately we're trying to drive.
Yeah. It's so important. We want to know, we have our mission. We need to be able to find key data points to understand that we are fulfilling our mission, right? And how we're doing it. And it gives us an opportunity both internally, so not only the external piece of rallying support, and that if you're supporting a cause, you want to know that it's working, that it's doing what we're intending for it to do. But also internally, it gives us an opportunity to course correct and figure out how to get better each day, and all of that. So it's important on both of those fronts. I think the timeline of it, it's always, how do you do that well with usually smaller nonprofits, smaller teams, and how do you kind of do that well? I think what we look into, there's 3 pillars that we want to know that we're having a positive influence on, right? And those are education outcomes, health outcomes, and social emotional outcomes. So those are the 3 areas where we know that we know from data, and we also know just from speaking to our youth and our youth coming back and the stories that we hear and all of that. I think qualitative data is very important, but the quantitative is as well. And hearing the experiences of youth coming through our program and coaches and all of that is really important as well. But I think we want to, we know that we're positively influencing those 3 areas. And then now the tricky thing that we're at right now with that, remember that national is much, it's not like national was started and it's this big mothership and then there's these chapters. It was the other way around. It was Beat the Streets New York was 2005, Philly was 2009, LA was right around there too. All of Chicago was there for a really long time. And then all of these different chapters launched, and people are resonating with the Beat the Streets mission, starting that in their communities. So now we're in a situation national where, okay, everyone's doing things a little bit differently, and that's okay. But we do want to converge on what are we measuring at the national level we're all going to stick to. And then of course there's room to do more, at the local level as well. But having just a a small set of data points that we're really leaning into and doing well at the national level is kind of where we're at. And the first part of that is really understanding and collecting, like, what is everyone doing already and how's it working. But then from speaking with Philly, you know, we measured grade advancement rates as our educational outcome, right? Because we could then compare those to the stats on the average. You know, we know that the dropout rates are a big issue in Philly and across urban America. And we know that it's only 68.5% of kids will graduate high school, but the kids coming through Beat the Streets is 98.2%. And then we also know that that's an outcome that then also has that's tied up to all sorts of outcomes that are a lifetime ahead, right? So I think the way I think about it is I want to try to find the areas in those three pillars that are also linked to more longer term outcomes that we could link to what's going to happen 20 years from now. Like a graduation rate is a good example of that. So that we could see, if we focus on these things now while we have our youth from K through 12, that's going to make a difference 10, 20, 30 years from now as well.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you talk about impact measurement, and you know, it's a whole full-time job in and of itself to be able to clearly think of consistent metrics, not just at your individual program level, but now as, you know, the executive director of Beat the Streets National, like across the nation. And you know, there's different levels of magnification and different levels of impact. And I'm curious for you to expand a little bit upon the differences in your perspective now, having worked at Beat the Streets Philadelphia, one of the many satellite locations for Beat the Streets as an entire organization, and now kind of looking at it from that eagle eye view of the national level. Like what has changed, and just what's your vantage point now?
So one of our three focuses at national so I mentioned our 2028 visionary goals or growth goals: 28 new cities, increase girls wrestling 280%. There's fundraising goals within those two, but it's really, this next chapter is about how do we grow this across the country. Then the three things that we're focusing on in the first 12 months. So I started in this role in last August. And the first 12 months are focused on three areas: scaling strategy, building team. We need to build internally to be able to go accomplish and achieve these goals, and fueling mission. So fueling mission, that's like the Gear Up campaign. How do we run these campaigns and build partnerships and direct resources to all of our chapters? The building team, we're making some hires. We've made some part-time hires. We're looking to make another full-time hire pretty soon. We got to build the team we need to go achieve these goals. The third, scaling strategy, is multi-phased. That's where we're deep diving on our strategic thinking. We want to come out with the roadmap. We want to come out with the playbook and the process that we need to onboard new chapters, people that haven't started the Beat the Streets organization yet, but they want to. And how do we identify those leaders, empower those leaders, support those leaders to create a sustainable and impactful organization? And then the other parts of that scaling strategy is how do we also map out what's already exists, because there's other organizations out there that are similar to Beat the Streets, can have a similar mission. What's our approach to bring them into the fold? And then the third part of that strategy is how do we incentivize our existing established chapters to branch out into regional models and start and serve some surrounding cities. So this is all, that's like high level, but that's like kind of big picture, right? But what we're doing right now is deep diving on that and like really figuring that out. And that's going to take some time. And the first step of that, so the first phase of that scaling strategy project is, well, what's our touch point and check in each year with all of our existing chapters? What's the key information we need to know that we're doing a good job on mission delivery and organizational health and all of these things that, so we kind of know that we have our core really strong. We have that process set. So with that, we have our I've got a board call actually tomorrow. Like, this is part of what we're going to be talking about some of this, but we're launching this project we'll be reaching out and collecting that information. And then from those findings, that's when we're going to be able to converge on our impact data sets that we could really commit to. So I guess I'm just kind of saying all that to say, like, we're a little bit early in the stage for me to like fully answer your question, but these are the actions we're taking to get to get to that point where we, we're figuring out what everyone is, we know what we're doing is working, because we're seeing how many youth are activated. We're seeing how many youth we're serving, coaches that we're getting involved, and each chapter has outcome sets that they're measuring. And then now we're going to go and collect all that through conversations and converge on what are the ones that we're going to really commit to at a national level. And then that's going to help us. That's phase one of the scaling strategy, because that's going to help build that's going to be a part of our playbook. That's going to be a part of our roadmap. That's going to be a part of our process to grow new chapters. So that's where we're at as an organization. But yeah, it's very much building phase, but we're moving in the right direction on all fronts.
Well, the organization is really lucky to have you at this level and thinking strategically. And I think you answered the question perfectly. What I was really looking to draw from that was a perspective into the different kind of view of goals and strategy when it's like at an individual nonprofit level versus now we're talking about a conglomerate, right? Mm-hmm. Like the systems thinking of, well, like just even earlier, you said partnerships look a lot different at Beat the Streets National, at the national level. There's partners that work just at that level. It kind of makes me think of my time consulting in government, right? Like the difference between federal versus state and local versus down to like an individual municipality, right? So really, really valuable. I know we're getting close to time, Ben, so I just had a couple more questions for you. What does success mean for you? And maybe answer this like for you personally and for you as the leader of Beat the Streets, and maybe those two answers are the same, but just curious what success means and looks like for you.
So personally, it's more of like I don't know, it's more of a process. Like I want to know that I'm doing a good job and taking care of my family, my kids, my wife, and providing a good life to them, and helping all of us grow as people, and then personal growth. I want to know that I want to feel that I'm learning and growing as a leader, as a person, and also as a dad and a father. So, I want to, success feels like progress, I think, to me. And I want to know that I'm having a real impact in the world. I want to be able to go to sleep each night and know that I'm doing something that is positively contributing to humanity. And I'd say all of those kind of three areas are all happening, and are on a good trajectory. So it's just paying a daily attention to each of those three areas and continuing on that path. And then for Beat the Streets National, this is also, well, I don't know, this kind of ties in it ties into the third kind of box for my personal, which is I want to feel like we're really making an impact in the world and making a difference. And Beat the Streets National that's the, that I'm all in the Beat the Streets mission, and I want to see it grow across the country. And then I want to see it grow across the world. I know that what we're doing, I believe in what we do. I know from just the personal experience, the conversations with our youth, what we're seeing happening is inspirational. And I know that there's still this tremendous need out there. So I want to continue to figure out how to get better at what we're doing and how to grow this across the country and then grow this across the world. So I keep thinking in my mind, I'll just come out and say it. I don't know. Sometimes I have these internal vision and I don't know how to get there yet. But I'll just say it anyway, even though I don't know how to get there. But I think about, we're reaching over 8,000 kids each year right now through Beat the Streets. In my mind, I think like, how do we reach 100,000 kids a year in Beat the Streets? How do we do that? I don't know quite how just yet. I know that we're doing the right things to get on that path. But I think it's growth. What we're doing is working, and I want to make sure that we're there to go be there for every. I want us to be there for every kid across the world that needs what we do. That's really the goal. I don't know how. I know that's going to take a long time and a lot of work, but I think in my career, I could help move the needle and get us closer to that goal. And then, it might take more time than that. But I'm going to be really focused on that for what I hope, the next couple of decades, I hope, yeah.
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 It seems like a great pursuit to dedicate your life to. Bigger than you problems to chase. And one more question, Ben. What's the one message that you want Beat the Streets to send to the world?
I'd say the importance of having that positive role model coach in your corner. I think that's what I want to first just give a big thank you to all of our Beat the Streets coaches and volunteers and mentors, and that those are, it's one, we have we're building an organization but that's the mission. Those are the people that are making the mission possible. And I think that's the message, is that there's a lot of, we all have that power and responsibility and ability to do some good and be there. And we gotta step up for our youth, for our youth across the country, right? Like, I think every kid deserves a fair shot at life. And I think that, we should all feel that responsibility, but also empowered to know that you could make a difference. So I think my big message is a thank you to all of our coaches, and then rallying more people to do the same, because we need coaches, volunteers, mentors. Those are the people that make our mission possible. Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, I don't know. I could kind of go in a bunch of different directions, but I feel like that's the one I wanted to talk about today.
It's a tough
choice
to wrap around, but you did great, Ben, and I couldn't support the mission more. I mean, everyone should check out Beat the Streets. Any plugs you want to make? I know you got the Gear Up campaign. Tell us about like the website and where people can learn more about Beat the Streets and the mission and get involved.
Just beatthestreets.org. Spell out the word beatthestreets.org. You'll see the Gear Up campaign. We're also doing a holiday drive for our families in need. So you'll see both of those campaigns right on our homepage. So if you're listening to this, please consider supporting or spreading the word, sharing it on your social media, your LinkedIn, your Facebook, whatever you're using, just kind of spreading the word there. My contact info's there too. So absolutely reach out to learn more. And this all, none of what we do, none of the good work that happens across the world is possible without people supporting it, right? You need, so I just, encourage whoever's listening to please reach out to learn more.
Thank you, Ben Reiter. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time, man. It's always great to reconnect.
Thanks, Booyah. Yeah, it was awesome catching up with you, and thank you for all you're doing. It's really great to connect, man.
One dream, my friend. All right, be well.
Thanks, you too.
Oh, hi, Madeline, RCOO, and Ibrahim, CTO, man, sir, person. Welcome to the Nonprofit Lab again. It's great to have you guys.
Hello.
I love being a sir person.
Well, Ben Reiter, that guy, he was a huge inspiration in the start of our company, the mission of Match Nice, right? Like we talked about the story that was the place, like volunteering and working next to him and seeing the way that he had fostered all of these partnerships was the space that created the aha moment for the company. And so it just felt really right to have him on the show and to hear about, his story, which what'd you what'd you guys think? Because like I don't know of any other philanthropic MMA fighters that like are actually in the nonprofit space as heavily as he is right now. But what would you guys think of his story?
I thought it was incredible. I mean, just hearing the path that he took, I love hearing stories like that because a lot of times they're referred to as an unconventional path, right? That someone took an unconventional path, but I've heard so many of them. And I think it's a great way to just, the more that you hear, I think it just allows you as a person, just, on a personal level to say it's pretty normal to follow your intention and your intuition and your interests. And, it can take you in all different directions. You don't have to, play things by the book necessarily. And I think for the most part, a lot of people don't. So it's nice to hear that the unconventional path is not actually that unconventional.
Yeah, I mean that's so true, and I hope that's a product of the podcast as well. As we talk to these nonprofit leaders, a common question that I'm going to be asking everyone is like, what inspired you? Like, how'd you come into this space? And I think we're going to find that everyone is going to have their own little like story and path. Ben's is one that's quite different for sure, though. Eve, what were your thoughts on the conversation as a whole?
Echoing what Madeline said, like, I mean, the guy's a badass. There's no other way to put it. But like Madeline was saying, I don't think there is a set path of people getting into this. I think everyone has their own way of getting into it, and Ben's just happens to be pretty dope. And when it comes to like involvement and like based off the call itself, like just seeing the amount of passion that Ben had for or has for what he's working on and then trying to push it forward. Like I took down some points that just stood out completely, and it's exciting to know that we have him on the podcast supporting us, and we're working on something to eventually support him as well.
Yeah, I mean, talking about community, making these partnerships and building a community around a mission, because a lot of times in our research, we've heard about how nonprofits end up, and I know Ben's talked about this, kind of you end up pitting yourself against other people because everybody's fighting for dollars and yada, yada. But I think that what he's doing with building a community around the mission is bringing it back to like, why are we doing this in the first place, right? We're doing it for the kids, right? So I think that just staying centered on that mission, and that's a common thing we've just heard, that's in my own work in life, and in Match Nice and also in nonprofits. It's so important to be crystal clear on what your mission is, and everything else kind of can fall into place from there.
Yeah, and the definition of that mission like may change for an individual over time, but the passion and the what draws them to that space is core. And I think we're going to find that for everyone that we speak to. Dr. Otten in the last episode said the same thing about like what inspired you to move in. I think she said that it's the passion of the people in this space, right? Like people don't join the nonprofit sector to become multi-millionaires. They're there to make an impact and to make a difference. And, it's just really cool to kind of see that line kind of threaded between the people that we've talked to before and now during the podcast. And what you said about partnerships, there's a soundbite that Ben helped me understand about the dynamic between nonprofits is they can be very cooperative when it comes to programming, but unfortunately nonprofits are also very competitive when it comes to funding, particularly around grants, particularly around big donors. And so, I think that draws back to what we're trying to do as a company is to democratize giving and not create this situation where nonprofits have to kind of go elbow to elbow for the same exact like finite source of large funds, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I want to hear you more about what you were saying about like just the points that you took down from the conversation. I have a couple, but I wanted to hear what your big takeaways were.
So I'll go over the two main ones. The first point was that he emphasized the idea of being growth focused, and that's a pretty broad statement in a good way. The one example being Ben's goal of getting Beat the Streets to the point where it's in multiple cities, in multiple states, and growing that to become a support mechanism, not just for his local community, but for other communities as well. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the previous conversation of us talking about like the collaborative, but also competitive environment between nonprofits. We're put in a position where we can start promoting collaboration and kind of pushing away the idea of competition when it comes to supporting communities that may lack certain things that other communities have experienced and are taking advantage of. One example being Beat the Streets. If they're able to grow and just start, copying and pasting themselves into other communities, whether it's in the same state or across the country, all that is just benefiting the community. Now, the approach that Ben was talking about, I think, is pretty sound. I think the biggest thing is bringing it to the attention of the community as something that should be supported and welcomed versus something that's unknown and should be questioned. The other point that I want to I'll save the second point. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this first, and then I'll go over my second main point.
Yeah, the conversation with Ben was the first time I've talked to a nonprofit leader that's kind of operating at the top of a kind of franchised model, right? Like Beat the Streets National, I think there's 8 different cities or locations that they're operating out of. And to kind of get that eagle eye perspective of how every nonprofit is focusing on the ground, but how do you coordinate these efforts, and then also focusing on expansion, makes me wonder like how we could be part of equipping nonprofits to support those types of scaling strategies. And I think our solution is really adept to like quickly scaling to other websites, platforms, etc. So, but then like how could there be potentially like shared initiatives? Like he talked about the Gear Up drive, for example, and I love the way that they've kind of broken that down into like, this is what your dollars means in terms of this amount of gear for this many people. But when you and I think that it's currently on the national site, but like, could each of these individual nonprofits have kind of the same funnel for the national fundraising efforts as well as their own individual efforts? So kind of thinking about fundraising that not only benefits that one franchise, but is also contributing to the whole at the same time, and vice versa.
I think that also could apply to broader goals. We talk a lot about the sustainable development goals, but there's also cause areas. There's tons of different ways that you can categorize the work that nonprofits are doing. But thinking about, if you're talking about a franchise model of many smaller branches leading up to, the main organization, but there's also the idea of everyone that's working in youth sports all kind of coming under one umbrella. And is there a way that money either, goes into the top and comes down, or goes the other way? If nonprofit A is just crushing it with donations, is there like a spillover or a partnership where, the money continues flowing to other nonprofits that are working on that same mission or that same cause area or broader?
Yeah, that's such a great point, Madeline, because there are these coalitions, nonprofit coalitions. And I think I remember that Beat the Streets is part of something in Philadelphia called like the Youth Sports Network or Initiative. I'm totally probably.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
But it's a group of all these different youth sports nonprofits that kind of convene. So not everyone's part of it, but many are. And how are they thinking about fundraising, and how are they thinking about financially supporting these nonprofits? I think that's a really big question for us to explore. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Definitely. I had one other thing that stood out to me was Ben said something about COVID, and we're past the time of March of 2020. We're still in dire straits here, but there was a lot of talk, especially in that time when COVID was first happening, of like, now more than ever we need your donation, all these kinds of things. And I think either Ben said it or it was in my own head. I was like, this need for funding is always urgent. And I think that we learned that stat when we were just starting off with Match Nice, learning about how most nonprofits only have enough cash to, fund them for like a month. That sounds pretty urgent to me. So I think just, changing the conversation around just donating when things seem like they're dire. There's a lot of problems that are ongoing all the time in the world. And so, yeah, just kind of changing how we think about urgency too.
Yeah, and like the types of things that we give to, right? Like we everyone wants to support that like lifeline type programming that seems super like dire and urgent. But what nonprofits are often not presenting to donors is, hey, we need money to pay our people, like payroll, or hey, we need money to keep the lights on at our facilities, or we need money to stock the bathrooms with toilet paper, or whatever that is, right? Like those kinds of needs are just as urgent. And I think that in this donor centric model that we're in, this environment that we're in, those things are kind of just put in the background and kind of baked into these sexy programmatic like focused initiatives. So, I'm excited about testing out and seeing how we might be able to change that. And, you guys know we launched a poll recently on LinkedIn to see, would people be willing to donate to overhead expenses? And so far we found that close to 3 out of 4 people said like, yeah, I'd donate to cover payroll or, even marketing costs, etc. Not just like that backpack drive.
Yeah, that was really exciting to see the results starting to roll in about that poll. It's just encouraging to see that that level of transparency coming from nonprofits is not something that people are necessarily going to turn their nose up at or not want to donate to. That's very encouraging for us, because that's what we're trying to do is help nonprofits say, hey, these are what my needs are. They might not be, this much of it is programming, of course, which is the stuff that we're really seeing that tangible difference. But there's so much stuff behind the curtain that needs to happen to be able to make those amazing programs run smoothly.
Yeah, I had like maybe a couple other big kind of takeaways I wanted to discuss, but before I go to those, Ibrahim or Malin, was there anything that you guys want to throw in?
There was one more point I wanted to bring up, and this might be something that we could think about down the line, but the Gear Up program, and Puya, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was the partnership program where they were getting discounted items that they were fundraising for because they were fundraising for us. So it was a partnership they developed through that program. That had me thinking, what if a lot of nonprofits are struggling with that just because they already have their hands full? Because at the end of the day, it's difficult to tell a nonprofit, hey, you should do this. And then their response is with what time? Because there's already so much going on. Is what if at some point we're able to provide them with those meaningful partnerships where if they're fundraising for something specific, we already have an existing relationship or can start developing one for them. It allows them to immediately promote that fundraiser in a way that Ben did with the Gear Up program.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting concept and something definitely worth exploring. I could go back to Ben and as we talk to other nonprofits, understand how they've cultivated partnerships with businesses and the communities around them to kind of maximize the impact of their raised dollars for their community, and how we could be a part of that equation, I think is a really good question.
I love the idea of bringing the sharing of best practices between nonprofits into what we're doing, definitely, and saying, hey, this really, doing it this way really worked for me. Let me share my resources with you. I mean, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and for our listeners, that's actually the initial problem that we were exploring as a company, was how do we, being at Beat the Streets and seeing the power and the potential of these nonprofit to nonprofit partnerships, asking ourselves, how could we create those connections and how could we use that to maximize social impact, therefore our mission? And we quickly discovered that it is very difficult to systematically and at scale foster nonprofit to nonprofit partnerships. There are so many different stars that have to align for those partnerships to happen. So it's certainly not like a technology easy click button solution, but it's part of our mission and where we want to go. And the point that I was going to get to is, Malin, what you said about fundraising being the most pressing issue, right? Like we looked and interviewed, 30 plus different people in the nonprofit sector to understand at the start of the pandemic, hey, what are your biggest challenges? What are your greatest needs? And the number one thing we heard over and over again was, we need money. We need money to survive and we need it now. And so we pivoted to, building this impact-centric fundraising platform. And I have a very obvious suspicion that when I ask future nonprofit guests what was, the biggest change that had to happen for you and your nonprofit during the pandemic, it's going to be around fundraising, right? Because everything has historically, like Ben was saying, been events, and moving to digital was a huge challenge that, everyone had to get up and behind very quickly. I think it's also a good thing in terms of like our company and where we're positioned, right? Like digital adoption, the pandemic forced nonprofits to explore this. And I love the way that, Ben described how quickly they were able to put their heads together to not only pivot fundraising to be more digital first, but it required them to go digital first on their programming, especially for a youth like wrestling nonprofit, right? Like, sorry, can't put you in a half Nelson or a headlock right now. I'm like quarantined at home, or, sorry, we can't meet in person at the mentoring center. So, I think that's an interesting, how can we tie in specific initiatives and fundraising to support the digital transition and maturity of nonprofit programming is another question that's come up for me.
Yeah, I mean, and what an amazing example of staying true to your mission, right? Even though you can't be, in Ben's example, even though you can't be in person and, actually wrestling, the mission of your organization is broader than that. You're here to support these kids in any way that you can. And in this particular instance, with the pandemic and everything, that had to change to be a digital channel. So just once again, how important it is to just be crystal clear on your mission. It makes it so easy to go like, oh, we need to do this now.
Well, it's been a solid conversation. I think a lot of good takeaways. I like the ideas that have come up, more questions for us to be exploring. Episode 3, second guest, wrapped up. Don't forget to click like and subscribe and follow us on socials, and just stay in touch with us as we continue building the nonprofit lab. As always, I'm going to try to end this episode on a quote that I think is befitting to the episode and our guest. This one comes from Harriet Tubman, and she said, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world." Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.